and to also look at the report submitted to us by the Integrity Commission with regards to raising the threshold for declaration to $12 million. I know that in the interim, there was a discussion that both member Chuck and Robinson had along with Mr. Beresford from the Commission with regards to that submission, which of course was a discussion subsequent to the presentations made at a previous meeting. It is our intention to look at the proposals as put forward by the Commission today and to make a decision with regards to our accepting the proposal as the case may be. The meeting will be brief today because we do want to get on to another very important subcommittee or sessional committee that has responsibilities for the joint select activities regarding the same Integrity Commission activities. But this one has to do more with the Protective Disclosure Act. I know that, members have indicated from time to time, difficulties with regards to meeting on time and getting, on a timely basis to deal with these committee matters. But I really want to use the opportunity to indicate that we have to show a little more commitment to dealing with the Commission matters. You can't hear me? Wow. No, I'm making the point that we really need to have a stronger attendance of committee members to enable the fulsome discussion and to have the benefit of a wider perspective from the teams that have been put together to help us in dealing with matters relating to the Commission. So I'm hoping that after today, we will see a very stronger participation of members with regards to this particular Oversight Committee, which is so important. Apologies for absence. I note here apologies from the Honorable Juliet Holness, the Most Honorable Juliet Holness, and the Honorable Clifford Warmington. Are there any other apologies for absence? Madam Secretary, that's it. The minutes are before you, team. Yes.
I move for the confirmation of the minutes, September the 12th, 2023.
Okay, the minutes have been moved and seconded. Are the confirmation any matters arising from the minutes?
Well, I think basically, Chairman, to reaffirm a position that has been put in the public space, that since 2018, notwithstanding the tens of thousands of declarations that have been filed, we noticed that Mr. Beresford said since 2018, that's 5 years or so, only 1,056 declarations have actually been reviewed. Obviously, since then, it may have increased. So this Oversight Committee, in an informal meeting, can I refer to Chairman?
Yes, please.
in an informal meeting, a proposal was put which we should try to adopt, that the declaration, the threshold should move from 3.5 to 12 million.
No, just a bit of correction. That was proposed at a formal meeting.
Okay.
Right. You had an interim informal meeting.
So
when further explanation was given.
Right, so we will adopt that position to 12, because my understanding is that it would have brought it down to about 12,000 declarations. The difficulty is that even so, 12,000 is still a lot. And, you know.
Sorry, just for accuracy, 10,000.
Well,
yes. Just for accuracy.
Yes, 10,000 still is a lot. And I think we should still invite the IC to determine what would be a more manageable figure. Because to ask even 10,000 persons in the public sector to file, and they file every year, and they're not being reviewed, to my mind, it's just, you know, a waste of energy and time for these public sector workers, because they go into the archives. I don't know if it makes sense.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. No, not yet. Yes. Member Robinson.
I would add to that. In the informal meeting, we had a discussion looking at particular categories of public sector workers, and I would like to formally recommend that the Integrity Commission reviews some of the categories that currently have to file to determine whether they should continue to file going forward. So, for example, I raised the issue of whether every member of the JDF needs to file. And I'm not convinced that they do. I think maybe officer level and above would need to, but I don't think every member of the JDF, in many cases, not interfacing with the public, should be required to file. I also question, as an example, does every doctor in the public service need to file? Again, I don't think so. And I think the risk-based approach should be taken. If you are in a decision-making capacity where you're probably dealing with procurement of equipment, those kinds of things, then certainly. But, you know, the everyday doctor who is seeing patients, I don't see why that person needs to file. So, and there may be other categories. So I believe even within the now down to 10,000, we should ask the Integrity Commission to review some of those categories and from a risk-based perspective determine whether all of the individuals who are now currently required, whether they believe it should be so going forward.
So I recall that that discussion was part of the first meeting that we had. I also recall that the Commission is saying that, yes, they are aware that there is need for a deeper look and perhaps the risk-based as being one of the options. But I think on an interim, they had to deal primarily because of time, one, and also the need for them to be able to look a little closer at these categories as we indicated, so that the ask now is for the 12 million threshold, but that is an ask that is going to be subject to further review at a later point in time. So perhaps we may want to consider whether we do approve the submission as indicated now, but with the proviso that this would be an interim arrangement and that they would now pursue with energy and vigor the deeper analysis and the possibilities for the risk-based solution.
Yeah, so I think absolutely we should approve the threshold to 12 million, but I'm saying even by approving it, you're still dealing with 10,000 declarants who they can't at all look at those declarations. So I think we should push them to review the categories and come back to us and say to us whether they believe within those categories, whether you can now remove some of those persons who are required, given that you can't review them currently or in the near future under the current arrangements.
Right. So I think that latter part of your comment would be apropos. And they did indicate that time would have been an issue with regards to that deeper review. So, Member Chuck?
Right. Chairman, I certainly have had discussion, informal discussion with, Member Ford, Minister Ford, in regards to these declarations, and I certainly would like to hear her perspective on it. And the reason why, Chairman, in that informal meeting we had a few weeks ago, October the 12th to be exact, I made the point that we filed all these declarations, but there's no indication that from these declarations that we have reduced corruption in any way. In other words, most of the actions that have been taken on these declarations is where people fail to file or fail to respond to the IC, and therefore they're taken to court. And, apart from reducing, and I indicated I don't have a problem saying that sensitive posts should file, but to ask 5,000 or 10,000 people to file when you're unlikely to investigate all of them, it seemed to me the IC could use their time much more profitable rather than, being on this paper chase or looking at declarations. And what is important, Chairman, and I think Member Ford could give us some indication, the vast majority of countries don't require this, that you have declarations. So how many countries require that we have declarations? And the question is why? Because in the time I had the opportunity to visit the offices of the corruption, and in fact, any of these, the integrity IC offices, I'm sure you're going to have a room big. This parliament could not hold all the files they have. So you're wasting space. So I don't know, Member Ford, I think you've done an investigation on the countries that actually require declarations and those which don't. Maybe we could hear from Member Ford.
I take note of what you've said, and I think that the considerations in terms of what the future should hold for this is well placed. And my own take from the discussions that we had when Mr. Beresford came is that there is a desire to go where you are in terms of the thinking, but the timing to enable this has to be secured, and so we have to work on that with them. But Minister Ford, you wanted to?
Thank you, Chairman. The request for an increase in the threshold, the income threshold, is one that we have been considering. And since our last meeting in particular, I have been reflecting on the data provided by the Integrity Commission. The number of declarants that would be required to submit their declarations at the current thresholds over the period 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, the actual number of declarations filed against what was reviewed. Also, I have been considering the ask and what that number would look like at the higher threshold of 12 million. And it does appear that even at 12 million, the Commission will be constrained in looking at any significant number of the declarations. And I have been further reflecting on the soundness of policy and law, which has such a high administrative burden for compliance, where it is just not feasible so far to review the matter. So, Chairman, I am firmly of the view that it doesn't matter how nice sounding solutions are, if they cannot be effected with administrative ease, then we may create more problems. And so I now find myself highly doubting the model. And even though I appreciate the ask for the increase in threshold, and it is logical following the revised compensation in the public sector, I am left with little or no consolation that the Commission will be in a position to review any significant amount of those. And if the fight against corruption is premised on a knowledge of whether your income, your assets reflect your legitimate income, then how will you know if the vast majority of declarations remain unexamined? Something is amiss.
In fairness, I think we went through
Right, so
much
that's
of
the
that,
first
if
part.
you recall.
Yes.
I think that what we have to determine, though, team, and I'm encouraging the continued discussion, of course, but I think we have to determine whether we are going to enable this recommendation to be effective for the session which now will ensue, that is the December 31 declarations. And then, of course, we can go further to look at how do we make more serious amendments and adjustments in the new fiscal year. But I would want us to consider whether, in fact, we are disposed to make an approval determination here, or we will not approve.
Well, Chair, for me, I'm clear that we will approve. I'm supporting the recommendation to move to the 12 million threshold. As the Integrity Commission itself said, the plan is to phase out the income-based approach and move to a risk-based approach, which they said would need, I think, a 3-year period to achieve that complete phasing out, which I think is consistent with what Member Malahoo Fort is saying. But to repeat myself, I'm saying even before we get to that 3-year period, they can review from now some of the categories and see to what extent you can reduce the amount of persons who are required to file at this point in time.
Thank you, Member Robinson. I see Member Malahoo Fort wants to
Well,
comment again.
Chairman, like I say, I believe the ask for the increased threshold is logical, and I'm not opposing it, as it were, but I do believe that we need to hear from the Commission what is going to happen. Just hearing taking 3 years without more to the declarations filed and unexamined, we need to get some more information on the approach that needs to be taken. But it would really be madness to have the same threshold with so many others coming into it. It would really be madness for them, their inability to examine the existing quantity and then adding more to it, you know. But I think I'd like to have a more focused conversation with the IC about the approach to be taken. Because the truth is that the revelation, you know, has left us with much to consider. And as legislators and policymakers, we have to be agile in ensuring that where models do not work, administratively or otherwise and cannot achieve the goal that we set, then we will have to review. And it makes no sense that some slavishly stick to it when it is not furthering the goals. Parliamentarians are not the only category of people whose integrity in public life need to be under constant scrutiny. We are an important part of public life and government, but we are a small part. You know, and the compliance rate is high, yet the focus is uneven. And when you turn the spotlight on one category, you leave others in the dark. And I want to know what is happening to those who are in the shadow.
Chairman, as you would have remembered, Mr. Beresford had indicated the need for an amendment to accept electronic submissions. And when I queried, even at the 10,000, how he would handle the 10,000, he said the only way they could do that is if we approve the electronic submissions. And so in, response to Member Fort, he had in fact indicated an approach that could deal with the increased numbers at the threshold of 12 million, but only through electronic submissions.
Okay, I think we are in a position then, by consensus, to accept the recommendation, but to indicate very strongly the need for greater rigor in a deeper dive into finding a solution which will enable them to effectively complete the examination of all declarations and to avoid the situation that now obtains where a vast majority of the declarants are literally in trepidation as to whether their declaration is seen, and more importantly, when they will be in fact signed off on. And I think that is part of the concern there. So the issue of the electronic declaration is being dealt with, and I'll have more to say on that later on at another place today. But certainly we think that there is need for greater efficiency in handling the declarations to ensure that members are not left to wonder what is the state of their affairs. And of course, it leads to all sorts of speculations that sometimes are deleterious to the best interests of all, not just the declarants themselves, but the society as a whole. So I'm moving for the acceptance of the recommendation for the threshold to be increased to 12 million, but with the proviso that within the 3-year period, a proper and detailed review towards a risk-based solution be engaged.
May I suggest that at earlier intervals that we be provided with a report on how many of the backlog, of the declarations in backlog are cleared. I do not think it would be reasonable to have nothing done to those declarations, given that declarants had to go through a process to comply and not be at risk of prosecution. And so I would say at each 6-month interval, which would be that would be 6 periodic review over the 3-year period, that we are provided with information on the steps taken to have those matters reviewed. I certainly wouldn't want to hear that they're just put aside into a file 13, 14, or 15 and nothing is done to them, because it's really bringing into question whether a model for the declaration of assets and liability against your income and your debt is the most effective way to tackle concerns of corruption in public office. I'd also want to hear a little more from the Commission itself on its own research into the approach taken in other jurisdictions, and in particular the United Kingdom and Australia and some regions of Africa where the model is not premised on declaration of assets, but disclosure of interest and safeguards against conflicts of interest in office.
So, having regard to the very, very valuable suggestions that you've just made with regards to better information and more frequent flow of information into us in regards to the actual performance of processing the declarations. I'm going to make that recommendation, and I'm going to invite the commissioners to come in and for us to discuss some of these elements with them, because I think they are fundamental to the way in which the Commission will function, certainly in terms of the issues of dealing with declarations.
Just to clarify, my understanding is that an approval for a change to electronic submission will not impact the existing paper declarations and the massive backlog. So let us be clear that approving the electronic submission will have no impact on the tens of thousands of unexamined declaration.
No, well, I agree with you that it wouldn't have any impact on what is there already to be examined, but certainly it will have impact in terms of the future. And the threshold that now obtains will, I think, limit the declarations to somewhere in the region of 10,000. And with electronic submissions, we should be able to deal with them faster. That's the information that is coming from the Commission.
I'm not too sure because the evidence suggests they're doing approximately 200 per year. With an electronic, how many more can they do?
Yeah, what Mr. Beresford said is that there would be, I think, using forms of artificial intelligence to determine, based on the electronic submissions, which ones would require greater scrutiny. And that's why I think they are pushing to have the electronic submission approved. So it wouldn't be, in this case, all 10,000 being manually approved, but there would be some initial process that they would go through using the technology that may determine how you highlight variances, anomalies, etc., and then they would have a deeper dive into those.
Okay, I think, you see, I'm accepting all the discussions around it because I think it's important that everybody is satisfied in your mind that, yes, the appropriate decision has been taken with regards to accepting the recommendation for the 12 million threshold. And recognizing that this is not the perfect answer, the perfect solution to the problem, and that there's more work to be done. I think that I indicated that in terms of the guidance that we will give from this committee to the Commission when we indicate our approval of the recommendation. So I think if there's no further comments that we want to make on this, we could then conclude this discussion and to move on to the next item, which is to receive the report with regards to the allegations of irregularities in the approval process which resulted in the construction of a residential development located at 11 Charlemont Drive, Kingston 6. Contrary to inter alia, the permits issued by the KSAMC and NEPA and the Building Act. So the report having been tabled and pursuant to Section 73D of the standing orders has been referred to the Oversight Committee for review and determination and final report back to Parliament within 30 days. So the report is before us.
Chairman, I want to recommend an approach for the Oversight Committee. Where there are reports that are not referred for criminal prosecution, like this one, I believe it would be useful for the Oversight Committee, maybe on a periodic basis, 3 to 6 months after the report, to call those state agencies where recommendations were made in the report in relation to the state agencies to determine whether those recommendations have in fact been implemented or followed. Because after so for example, I would say in this particular case, there are recommendations related to KSAC, there are recommendations related to NEPA, right? I believe the Oversight Committee should determine whether it's 3 months or 6 months after the report is tabled, whether the recommendations are implemented. As we know in this particular case, the issues are not peculiar to the one development that took place. In fact, it is widespread. And I believe part of our responsibility, we have no control over what private players do, but where state agencies are involved, I think it's important that we determine that they implement the things that the Integrity Commission recommends. And if they can't, for various reasons, they can come here and indicate why they can't. But in this particular case, and given the widespread nature of breaches that take place, we should be following up to ensure that there is some, in my view, cauterization of what has been happening.
Okay, member, I hear what your comments are and the desire to have, further follow up on how the agencies that have been reviewed and recommendations made, how they are carrying through those recommendations. I think we have to be careful about the mandate of this committee and the areas that are really within our purview and outside of our purview. And I just want to remind you of Section 73D, which indicates what our responsibilities are. But the other agencies and other departments, and indeed other sessional committees of Parliament that have responsibility to deal with operational aspects of these agencies and entities that would perhaps should be guided in terms of this. But I think in terms of our own committee, it would be a little outside of our remit.
While I support the follow-up of Member Robinson, I'm not too sure that this committee has that jurisdiction. What we should do, though, Member Robinson, is to refer it to the other committees that should be overseen. Well, certainly infrastructure, which infrastructure committee should be looking at it. Right. I'm not too sure that this oversight committee is one that should interrogate whether, the recommendations of the IC, is being carried out in terms of the work of NEPA, KCC, NWC. I'm not too sure. This committee, then we would be sitting almost every week like the PAAC, which I don't think that's the idea.
And in fairness, as I indicated, Section 73D of the Standing Order does clearly state what our remit is. And whereas I understand what you're saying, member, and in fact, Member Chuck put his finger properly on the point that we can make referral, and we perhaps should, to the other sessional committees that have responsibilities for these Member Malahufort.
I see some wisdom, Chairman, in our considering report to see how other parts of government are impacted by the subject matter of the report. If the bane of contention is that there was approval given for one thing to be done, in order for that approval to be complied with, it would require a level of monitoring, and in the absence of that monitoring, something else happened. I see some wisdom in having the other parts of government who are implicated or whose functions are relevant to the monitoring be brought before us, because Standing Order 73D mandates this Oversight Committee to convene and consider the report submitted. So in considering the report submitted, questions may need to be asked and answered. So I appreciate the point made by Member Robinson.
Yes. Bearing in mind, though, Member, that our responsibility in relation to the Integrity Commission and its report and its operations and its activities, and also that the division of labor within this space allows for other sessional committees of Parliament to interrogate and deal with matters, that are outside of our remit. So I hear and I understand what you're saying, but I'm constrained by Section 73D, which is very precise in terms of what our responsibilities, and more so that our responsibilities relate to the Integrity Commission itself as an entity.
Well, yeah, okay, and we all are. Well, if that is the case, if this is not the correct committee, I'm recommending in relation to this specific report that the two entities, the KSAC and NEPA, be referred to the Infrastructure and Physical Development Committee, given the issues that were raised in this report. And, Member Chuck can relate, I can relate. These are widespread breaches. In fact, I would say they are the norm, not the exception. They are unfortunately the norm. There are court cases that private residents have been brought, and there have been judgments which have raised serious questions about, in particular, these two entities in relation to how building permits are handled. And there are citizens groups that have raised a number of issues around it. So if we can't adjudicate it here, I would say refer it to another committee, Physical and Infrastructure, and have those entities be given an opportunity to answer in relation to the recommendations made by the Integrity Commission, what they have done since the report has been tabled, what steps they have taken to deal with the breaches that have been identified, and how they plan to go forward.
Exactly, Member Robinson. What you have outlined is something which should have been done long ago, and the opportunity is now here for the Infrastructure and Economic Committee to look at the whole process of granting approval for development and whether, in fact, the enforcement mechanism is in place at NEPA, the municipal corporations. Because, Chairman, I haven't read this report, which is a long report, but I studied it. To have an officer see that they inspect the property, and it was twice, and both occasions, it was in compliance with the approval. It is frightening, absolutely frightening, because it was supposed to be 12 one-bedroom, and you're having 6 two-bedroom and 6 three-bedroom, and the officer can say he inspected it twice and confirmed that it was in compliance. What is more, Chairman, the NEPA personnel pointed out to their superiors that things were amiss. And, nothing was done. So, you know, all of these should be examined more fulsomely at the Infrastructure Committee. What is being done to ensure that there's no duplication or repeat of the errors that were made in this development, okay? So I would say we as Parliament, or I don't know the process, to refer to the Infrastructure Committee to examine carefully.
So when we make the report to Parliament, as per the requirement of Section 73D, whether it's this Wednesday here, or the following week, we can make those recommendations that the matter be referred to the relevant sessional committees of Parliament. In this instance, the Infrastructure Committee. So we will have the Secretary reflect that in the report that we will present to Parliament on this particular matter.
Right. Chairman, I'm just seeing linkages, you know, which takes me back to an initial concern, but I endorse the recommendation because pursuant to Standing Order 73DC, the committee shall have the duty of reviewing the annual report and other report of the Commission and submitting recommendations in relation thereto to both houses of Parliament. Right. So, in respect of this report, which would fall in the category of other report other than the annual report, or review, well, we have come to a recommendation before we have fully reviewed it. I certainly believe there would be some merit in reviewing the report before getting to a recommendation to the Houses of Parliament. And a review of the report would require us looking into the matters contained in the report.
But in fairness, member, the other members who have actually reviewed the report are now making recommendations consequent on their review. So it is the process that we are engaging in now is a review. We may not go page by page, but what we are saying is each member, having read the report, has been able to ask questions and or make suggestions and recommendations therefrom. So the review is going on.
A review by individual member does not amount to a review by the committee. I know you are aware of it. I don't mean to make it controversial. And I agree with you that the review does not, Chairman, I understand. A review does not mean that it has to go page by page, but the fact that members have read it does not amount to a review by the committee. That's the simple point.
I hear you, but I'm only saying we are the committee, and it's the collective of members' thoughts that make the final position on the committee. So, anyway, Member Robinson.
The other area that I think requires some greater elucidation relates to how we treat with issues of conflicts of interest. I think it's going to be important, and we may need further guidance from the Integrity Commission around definitions of what constitutes a conflict of interest and how public officials should treat once they believe they may be in a situation where a conflict arises. And I think there needs to be a framework developed around that issue of conflict of interest for public officials.
Well, you know, in fairness, I think that, let me hear from Member Malahou before I make my submission.
I'm wondering whether we shouldn't hear from some of the pertinent individuals to the investigation and entities before we make the recommendation to the Houses of Parliament. So, for example, the process of monitoring when building approvals are granted, what does that process entail as a matter of integrity monitoring?
Okay, so the committee does have the power to summon witnesses before it with regards to reviewing the report. And certainly if it is the suggestion of members, and we have consensus on that, yes, we can defer making any recommendations today in respect to this report and have witnesses come in to provide further elucidation on areas that may be of concern to us. And as chairman, I'm quite willing to do that, but we need to have a consensus from members on this.
Just indicating, Chairman, that I would lend my support to what was submitted by Member Maluhu a while ago.
What has to happen, though, is that we have to convene another meeting very quickly to deal with that, since we are constrained by the standing orders, which require a 30-day turnaround time for reporting on these reports, which are tabled in the House and referred to us.
I would add my support in relation to the two state agencies that were highlighted within the report, in particular, KSAC and NEPA, and for the respective officers who have responsibility for those areas to provide some insight to the committee as to what their process is, which goes beyond this specific report, but deals with a broader and more general issue that we're facing. So I'm lending my support to them being asked to be here to provide oversight on their processes.
So I'm guided as chair, but I'm mindful of the fact that we have to also be careful that we are not overstepping our own. Yes. It's very important because, you see, one of the things that we have to be sure about is the purpose for asking them to come. And if it is that it is going to enable us to better appreciate the report that is before us and to give guidance to the Integrity Commission in terms of its future reporting, then that is critical. But if it is a matter of investigating only on the efficacies within those departments, I think that's the purview of another entity in Parliament.
I think we would be treading dangerously if we go into very specific things but that's not what I'm saying. And that's not what I would be recommending. I'm talking about you're inviting somebody here to talk about a process that they would go through, which would be applicable here, but it would be applicable to every other application that they receive. So I'm not asking him to go into specific details here because I can see the danger there, but asking somebody to give you an idea of their process, I don't believe you would run into a problem there.
Well, except, I'm only making the point that as our remit relates to the IC and its operations and activities, and it is an IC report, it would mean that whatever further elucidation we require would be in keeping with the report itself that we got and what kind of guidance we can give to the IC in enabling this report to either be more efficient, effective, or to better reflect what the determinations were on investigation. So I think we want to be careful along that line so we are not overstepping the responsibilities that we have, and more so to get into other sessional committees' responsibilities. But I take your point, and that if it is the view of committee that we do invite these two entities to come in for the purposes that we indicate, then I also advise the Secretary to do.
Reflecting on it a little bit more, why don't we report to Parliament and let the Infrastructure Committee invite them to do the very thing to say what is the process, what has been improved in terms of enforcement? I mean, even if we invite them to ask them the process, and then we refer to the infrastructure committee, the infrastructure committee is going to do over the same thing. So, I mean, as an oversight committee of the IC, I don't think we should continue. I mean, when you read the report, with due respect, when you read the report gives a detailed examination of the process, right? The question is whether or not any weaknesses now have been corrected. So I personally would urge my colleagues, let us refer to Parliament and recommend that the Infrastructure Committee examine more fully the process and whether the process can be improved. I don't think that this Oversight Committee is really the body to do that.
No, it's just on.
So, having regard to the very strong appeal of Member Chuck, is there a review on the part of other members in this regard? I think your view comports with mine, I must tell you. So, and
But Charles, they may not have read the report as yet, right? Well, I haven't read the report. I can tell you the report goes into details of the process. Yes. So the only question is whether some of these failures have been corrected, which is really...
Not us.
Not us. Yes. It is for the infrastructure committee.
One of the things that I'm guided by is my own remit, and that is with regards to assisting the IC in enabling a more efficient reporting in the future. And that part of our review is in keeping with that. So if it would allow for a better understanding so we can guide the IC, then certainly I'd be very happy to bring, any member from any entity whatsoever, as long as they fall within the group that were investigated by the Commission and reported to us here in Parliament.
Subject to further consideration, I know it is a bit, presumptuous, but let us assume that my colleagues accept what, I have said and what Member Robbins have said. Let us report to Parliament and ask them to refer to the Infrastructure Committee to consider, the weaknesses of these two agencies, NEPA and the Municipal Corporation.
Chairman, I concede that the report does set out the process, and I also concede that we wouldn't want to go through a process to be repeated by another. I have been looking at the terms of reference of the Economy and Production, Human Resource, Special Development, and Infrastructure and Physical Development Committee. I'm a little uncertain how this report would be considered by them in the way that it requires to be considered. I also am mindful of the need to be efficient, and we wouldn't want to go through a process given our own mandate to have it. So here is what I would like, and I welcome the views of colleagues on it. The matters contained in this report require some serious consideration by the Parliament, particularly on the issue of conflict of interest and also monitoring process when permits are granted. The fact that no criminal prosecution has been recommended should not be seen as a relief. It may be a relief to the particular individuals, but insofar as the integrity of government and government processes are concerned, there are matters to be interrogated. So, yes. I am now doubtful whether the recommendation to the Infrastructure and Physical Development Committee is the right place.
The appropriate committee,
right.
which I think is the PAAC, in fact.
Right. So,
So your point is taken that we will, in the report, make a general comment with regards to, you know, these particular procedural
I believe it would be the
breaches,
PAAC.
and
Yes.
to
Looking
refer
at
to
it.
the appropriate
Yes.
committee of Parliament for further consideration. May it please you.
No, and my concluding remarks on this report was that this report started September the 5th, 2022, and was completed and presented to us in September 2023. At no time, to the best of my knowledge, was the public aware that an investigation was taking place in relation to this development at Charlemont. That's the IC was investigating. And it did not in any way hinder their investigation. What I want to say again, Chairman, the IC should learn from this. You investigate and then report, which is a good thing. You don't report investigations. And that is the point, Chairman, which I pointed out at our previous informal meeting. Do not report about investigations. Simply investigate and report, which is exactly what this report did.
Bo, thank you for that final comment. We now move to any other business. The motion for adjournment. This meeting is adjourned for a date to be fixed.